All right, hey guys, this is Mason from Team 84886A. Doing part two of the notebook explanation. Um, yeah, I would recommend that you watch the other videos to really understand the things that I'll be referencing throughout. Um, yeah, anyways, let's get started. So, I'm going to take you through our first design process. Obviously, we went through multiple design processes, and they obviously got better as we went throughout the notebook because grew more familiar with the format and more familiar with the way we just wanted to do things and what was important to document. So, I'm just going to basically go through the first one and just kind of explain things as we go through it. I would really recommend that you only define in the game defining you only really define what's important for that design cycle, but you still might want to reference anything as just a possibly like anything that might just affect it throughout as a simple call out. So like this for example, we didn't know how long this design cycle was going to be. We didn't know any of that, so we kind of just threw this in here right away, important rule updates, because we didn't know what necessarily rules might change from what we're actually defining here. So yeah, we just defined some simple terms that we'd like to reference throughout here. And we also mentioned that a good other note that I'll have is we mentioned that this whole thing at the end, that it's not supposed to be a full guide. It's really just what exactly is important for us in our design process. Yeah, heavy visuals. These are all in the rule manual, so it's pretty easy to find them. It's a good idea to organize these as much as possible. So we're just defining terms here, and then we go on to do a whole game overview which is really heavy on these visuals with all the call outs, with all these items, occasional highlights. So yeah, even more visuals here. These dimensions are really good. These dimension items because it tells exactly the lengths and stuff that not just the judges, you're not just defining it to the judges what the dimensions need to be for certain parts of your robot, but you're also defining it to yourselves because it's better to reference your notebook than the rule manual every time you need something. So yeah, we keep going. We had skill specific rules because skills was once again another focus of our team. And then over under design brief, we did the design brief because it was just kind of a great idea to wrap up all the ideas of this big segment here. There's a lot of documentation, so this design brief was just a simple way to briefly list our constraints, what exactly we're trying to achieve, and what the problem is. So, yeah. All right. So now strategy analysis. I thought this was very important for our team and everything. So you as a team need to find out what you want to focus on in the season, and you really want to like kind of define it here. So what we did first was we did a analyzing scoring potential. We just gathered every single possible point you could score in a match, and we just made a pie chart. And then we defined exactly what that pie chart got its data from, obviously, but it was just a great way to later justify our offensive play style and to really understand that full aspect of the game. Pros and cons. 515R, thank you for making this so relevant. It's really just a really great way to analyze everything. So we did, like, for example, an over-under, a big thing was driving over the middle barrier. So we analyzed the pros of that. It's harder to defend. It covers a larger area of the field compared to the side barriers. But the cons is you have to design a system to cross the barrier, obviously. So it opens up one thing, but it closes off another thing, and that's very important. In any strategy, everything comes at a cost to get a benefit. And then, yeah, we just wrapped that up there. Another thing we did here was this flow chart. Another thing I saw in a reference notebook. It's really great in the aspect of we're defining the way that we want to play a match in an ideal situation. So it's just a simple, is there over 15 seconds left? Yes. And then you go down the list, and if, depending on if the answer to the question is yes or no, it would tell you where to go. So, yeah, that was really helpful there. I really love this. This is a great visual. Visual heavy is a great way to define things. All right. let's get into the design brainstorming. You need to justify the order you're doing things. Like, the reason why we did the wheelbase for it first was it was the foundation for the rest of our robot. Great. Pros and cons will justify your later decisions that you make, and really, the sketches don't have to be that crazy. It just needs to portray an idea. Your goal in this should be to get the idea to you and your team and the judges exactly what you're trying to achieve, and then through CAD modeling you can add all those details. Yeah, so we go through it, we do the pros and cons. This is a little out of place, but it was a great thing to define the motor specs because it was really relevant to the wheelbase. And then the way that we did a decision matrix was that we gave each person 5 points per category to vote on. So usually we'd have bigger gaps in our decision matrices, which would make all our design choices very obvious what the team wants to achieve. It's not just we're combining everyone's things where there could be one voice stronger than another in a meeting or something. It's just the idea is that each person had an equal voice and that everyone could have their opinion heard on what design we wanted to do. So then we would just simply justify the decision we made through this. Another thing I noticed is in a lot of notebooks they do testing to justify, really before they get into this, create more justification on why they're doing that. It's a great idea to definitely do testing if you have the resources to, but if you don't have resources to do testing, don't do it. It's not worth it. It's better to just do this than to do all that. As long as you justify it before, like we did in our pre-design process acknowledgements, it's totally fine to not have pre-design testing, and you can test later to create justification. What is it? Brainstorming smaller details is definitely something you should do as you go on. Finer details. So we came up with our tank drive, for example, but we wanted to analyze the differences between 6-motor drive or wheel sizes. And there's so many more ways you could do that. You could go on for pretty much forever with finer details, but just really find what's important. Don't sit there and start just justifying every single part of the design process if it wasn't really something you thought of other than to fill criteria on the rubric. Yeah, so for the launcher, I really only recommend prototype solutions, like I said, but if your team doesn't have the resources, you should only really do it if your decision is that close. Like us, for example, we didn't know exactly if we wanted to do a catapult or a slingshot early season, so we just decided let's create a prototype, and then we went through the process of how we created the prototype, came up with testing results, and then we came up with our reasoning for the final decision. Yeah, the 3D printed tri-ball was just something we did because we didn't have the resources yet. It was just another standout thing in hindsight, but it was kind of fun to do and keep us on process to keep our design process going. And then once you're done through all of this things, it's a great idea to cover all the final details before you get in the CAD model, and not just because it helps fit a rubric, but because it'll make your things easier to CAD model too. So I'm gonna be a little honest here. CAD models, we didn't really do enough detail, I think, in hindsight, of what exactly is done through CAD modeling, but it did the job really in the aspect of a CAD model justified the way he did things and is really explaining himself throughout. Yeah, it needs detail on how and why you did things, and then the more visuals, the better. I mean, we weren't working very fast in the summer because the competition was very far away. This is mid-May, and the earliest competition we would have done would have been early August, so that's still 3 months, and there wasn't really a rush for us to get in the high depth. Yep. So more planning throughout, and this was important because that competition we planned in August just wasn't an option anymore, so we had to remake a timeline. It's important that as things change, you constantly define them. I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. This is just a bunch of defining plans and then more brainstorming since things changed. We took a huge break here. And then keep going, page 56. All right, so this is where we're actually in building now. So building instructions in the literal sense is more filler than anything. So if you're sitting there making like Lego instructions like this, it's more filler than anything in hindsight. The goal should be to document how you built it. This stuff is great. Only really do it if you have time or you think it'll help your builders that much. If it's not going to help your builders and they build fine off the CAD model itself, it's not as important. It's something we figured out later as we went on, but to the extent later as we went on, but we still did normal building days as we went on. Normal building days as time went on. Reflections are always good to have at like an end of a day or something. Like right here, building week 1 reflection. Later we switched from building days to weeks. We were doing a lot of building in these few days, so it made sense to do that. But the reason why I like doing building weeks is it's just less filler content in your notebook. And instead of saying I built this one thing but I misplaced this one screw and I had to rebuild it the next day, you can just at the end of the week summarize everything you did that week, as long as you took note exactly what it was and you took photos throughout. And then you should just be showing progress of your building throughout. So a before and after photo would be good. Or if you didn't have anything, just what you ended the day with. So let's look at this, for example. Building day 1. This is the process we went. We gathered the pieces. This is our halfway built photo. And at the end of building day 1, the wheelbase looked like this. This is a great chronological order of how things went that day. So yeah. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to here. So we didn't actually go to the Mall of America signature event. So we analyzed the competition from an outsider's perspective to see what things were important and what things that weren't important necessarily. So we made all these strategy takeaways, what things were important, such as controlling tri-balls, pushing them. And then as we kept going, we made basically an idea of like researched ideas of how we saw people solving certain problems. And then yeah, so I do want to mention something before I get into the team reference. The design process for us wasn't necessarily a strict cycle, like you went from one step to the next step. We kind of skipped around throughout, so that just because we were building the robot didn't mean we could research our next version. And that really allowed us to consistently be ahead of the other teams and have a really flexible design process. And the aspect of, let's say, there's a big signature event going on like Haunted or something and we wanted to watch it, we could watch that and then research it and directly put that in our notebook without feeling like we had to follow the design process directly. So all of the constant ability to switch was something that was really critical to our success. And yeah, so now we're going to get into the team reference. This team reference, it was a bit much on one team, but the idea was it was another source of justification for the changes we wanted to make. At this point, when we saw this competition, we realized that our other robot wasn't going to be very competition effective. So we wanted to create some sort of justification in the aspect that we wanted to change things and reevaluate the exact things we were doing. So we went through this again, we CAD modeled more again, and we basically added on to our pre-existing stuff accordingly. All right, so now that that's covered, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more. Updated priority timeline. We basically justified exactly how we built things, and when we're going to build things, how we're going to build things, when we're going to build things, why are we building things. It's important to constantly mention the way that you, not just the way that you're actively building things, but the way you plan to build things. So it's important to plan as much as you sort of possibly can. Later in our notebook, we made a timeline to basically say we need this item built by this day, this item built by this day, because our competition was in like 2 weeks. So it was important that we justified that. And we did that here on a less clean scale. So yeah, as I said, our notebook gets better throughout, and that's a good example. So Yeah, more building weeks, just sort of documenting the way that we built things, before, after. Let's keep going. Another heavy diagram, very good here. The aspect of we made a key on exactly what we wanted to build, how we built it, we numbered it. So we keep going. So I'm gonna skip pretty far here, right here. All right, so we did code updates once we were actually past the building points. We got everything we needed. We defined exactly what we wanted to program, and then right here, we explained the task that it did. And I think these heavy visual coding updates is something that many teams don't focus enough on. Coding is essentially the second half of the building process, and in a lot of notebooks, I didn't see a lot of coding stuff. So we thought it was important to justify everything that we did in the coding aspect of it. So it's pretty simple. We just drew it out and all that. So I'm gonna skip ahead a little more. Right here, we did another signature event analysis. This is probably a better example of how you should reference teams. You just simply state we stated one mechanism that we found on the robot that we thought was valuable to us and what we might want to replicate on ours. And we kind of just went through that on all of it. We specifically, in this aspect, looked at blockers on different teams. We saw what was effective in each one and the cost of each. And then we also did that for elevation and strategy. So let's go a little further. Let's go to the final part in our design process, testing. So testing helps makes your reflections easier on past designs. And it really only works if the test can be repeated. So it was important for us to list this testing methodology so that the test itself could be repeated and we could do it on other versions, which we did. It made it really easy for us to quantify our successes and compare them to other versions. Exactly, so compare the later data. The visuals help. We didn't do much of that early on. Like, it would be great to put visuals of where a robot starts, where the robot ends. We did visuals here on like the distant diagram to see, yes, there is outliers. The majority of the data is here. So let's keep going. And then evaluation. So when all this testing is done, it gives a very clear idea of what works on your robot, what doesn't. And you're just able to see the pros and cons of each thing. The photos were nice because it just tells you what you were working with. They're cool to have, and as a judge, I could really see exactly what you were talking about in each aspect of your robot. So we never actually competed with this version, so there wasn't things like competition summaries or anything along those lines. But we still had all these reflections and everything, so that when we started making our second iteration, everything was defined and we could start preparing for our actual first competition. So yeah, I think that's a great place to stop for this video. And the next video we'll go over some of the main things throughout our notebook that we did to help define our design process that other teams didn't do.